Good afternoon and welcome back from the break. I hope you've enjoyed today's day one of Black Hat Asia. With all black hats, we always begin with a keynote, and so we end with a Locknote. So in today's panel, we're going to discuss some of the briefings and some of the Arsenal sessions that you may have seen, some of the highlights, and we're going to touch on some of the security topics that have impacted this year. I'll start by introducing ourselves. My name's Lidia Giuliano, and I'm a member of the Black Hat Review Board, and I will hand it over to Ty to introduce himself.
Hey, my name's Ty Miller. I'm the Managing Director of Threat Intelligence. We're a specialist security company based in Australia. Been a long-term trainer at Black Hat, so I've been training for 10 years with Black Hat and presenting since 2008. And yeah, also a member of the Black Hat Asia Review Board.
Over to you, Ryan.
Yeah, hello everyone. I'm Ryan Flores here, Senior Manager for Research in Trend Micro Incorporated, part of the review board for Black Hat Asia, 17 years in cybersecurity, and I'm happy to be here to discuss, all of the great talks that I've also been watching the whole day, and cap it off for everyone.
Ashley.
Hi everyone, I'm Ashley Shen and I'm from Taiwan, but I'm based in Switzerland, working for Google Threat Analysis Group as a security engineer, sorry. But because of COVID, I'm actually working remotely in Taiwan now. And my research area is threat intelligence, targeted attack, and botnets. I serve in the review board since 2016, and I'm really happy to serve in the board till now.
Thanks, everyone. We were making a joke at the start that normally, because we're all virtual, we're used to sort of being up on stage and grabbing a beer, so it sort of helps us to relax a little bit. So we're going to pretend we've all got a beer in hand and just having a bit of a laugh. But I'm going to be moderating today's session. So I've got a couple of questions, but feel free to enter any of your burning questions for us in the questions box, and I'll do my best to read them out as we all talk about things. We saw some really interesting talks today. I mean, we had a great keynote from Gaurav Keethi, and he was discussing obviously the differences with cybersecurity as it relates to the government, and also how that translates to the private sector. We saw some great talks as well. Wi-Fi vulnerabilities, spy cameras in the Asia Pac region, and how that's affecting some of us. Let's start with you, Ryan. What was maybe one of the highlighted talks or briefings that you saw today?
Yeah, so for me, one of the highlight talks is the contactless payment, and because I believe that this is going to be a critical, one of the critical things moving forward with regards to the current situation that we are now in. So a lot of retailers, at least for example here in Singapore, and I know also in the Southeast Asia or APAC region, they are preferring contactless payments because you cough on your hand, you touch on the paper bill, and then you hand it over. It can be a medium for transmission for the coronavirus. So contactless payment has been picking up steam rapidly, and knowing that there's a lot of systemic vulnerabilities in the ecosystem of the contactless payment system. It's a very good thing to know, and also somehow very disheartening because a security weakness here, a security weakness there. Someone else says that it's not their problem, and things don't get fixed. So probably that's the major talk that I was interested in and learned a lot from earlier.
Thanks, Ryan. What about you, Ashley? What was a highlight for you today?
Yeah, there are a lot of talks that I like, and it's actually hard to pick just one. But I really like the keynote given by Gaurav. I like the perspective of looking at the problem as public and private. The perspective from the governments are definitely pretty different from private sectors. For example, as private sector, we sometimes blame user for not having enough awareness of the security issues. But government has the responsibility to raise the awareness. So I was impressed by the ideas of labeling scheme because it's trying to solve the problem from the perspective of the whole supply chains and the market's ecosystems. So consumers should have the power to request vendors for security design. And I'm really looking forward to see how it will be implemented and how the markets will react to it. And I also like the food nutrition analogy, and I would like to see more countries start to join the team sport.
Thanks, Ashley. What about you, Ty?
So look, you typically find that, a lot of the attendees either fall into the category of low-level talks where they like the detail, or the high-level talks where they just get the concepts. I tend to find myself a bit of an anomaly in that case where, being the trainer of the Shellcode lab for the last 10 years, I really love the low-level attacks. But then on the other side, being the CEO and sort of visionary for our platform, I really love sort of seeing the forecasts for the future, and how, different attacks and vulnerabilities are going to arise, and forecasting the state of the internet moving forward, and predicting, some of the security that we're going to see coming down the line. So, yeah, I tend to agree. I liked from the high-level talks, I really liked the keynote where the comparison between water sanitation with cyber, where the old days, we're told that we're not allowed, we shouldn't drink the dirty water, that it wasn't enforced on us. And, people still drink the dirty water, right? And comparing that to cyber, where we're currently saying to people, don't drink the dirty cyber, and we know that everyone is still going to drink the dirty cyber. So I thought that was really interesting, and therefore, we need to make sure that we shift our approach into a strategic one. I think that one of the challenges that I see with a lot of the government initiatives is that they are very strategic, and they take a long time to deliver. The challenge that we've got is that we're in a landscape where, in cyber, we're talking about a change in timeframes of minutes or hours, where 1 minute you're safe, the next minute you're completely vulnerable, and you could have suffered a security breach. On the other side of that talk, there was a comparison with car safety, where, drivers don't need to know how a car works, they just want to know that it's safe, right? But that's really different to cyber, where, you're comparing against a car on a stable road. It's a known entity, and it's going across something that's safe. When you put that into the context of cyber, though, it's more like sort of compare it against like the Matrix, where you've got those transparent bad guys where they're driving along the freeway, and suddenly drivers are turning into bad guys trying to run you off the road and those sort of things. So it's a little bit different, but I think it was a really good comparison. From that low-level side, I really like that the hardware-based vulnerabilities, so the page cache attacks, really stood out for me, and especially applying some of those hardware vulnerabilities into a different concept for operating systems really sort of shows just the extensiveness of attacks that are out there and that are going to keep coming down the line moving forward.
Thanks, Ty. I think that we had some really interesting sessions today, and I think for those that might have missed any sessions today, they are available for you to go back and watch and take another look, especially if maybe there's one that we discussed now that you didn't get an opportunity to see. I think there's just checking if there's any questions. So don't forget to send your questions through if there's any particular topics that you'd like us to discuss. But I think just moving on from the briefings today, to some degree, and we're probably all sick and tired of talking about the impact of COVID. So definitely take a sip of that beer. But I think in the last 6 months, it's definitely impacted many of us, not just personally, but professionally, whether you're working from home or that remote setup, or even things from privacy issues of tracking apps, or companies try to onboard those VPN systems quickly, because we're used to a small set of users working from home, and now all of a sudden you've got 20 20, 30,000 people that need to work from home, and the VPNs are under pressure. So, I mean, I think I'd just like to explore that topic a little bit. I mean, I know personally I've been affected with it in my day-to-day work. How has it sort of affected some of you in your day-to-day, and what are you seeing companies doing to sort of overcome some of these barriers? Ashley, I might start with you if that's okay.
Yeah, sure. So I believe COVID had a lot of impacts to everyone's life. Actually, for me personally, it was pretty bad because I was actually just relocated to a new country, and then suddenly like all the store closed, and then I was independent. I was like isolated and for 1 month, and it was pretty bad. But also from the cyber perspective, over the past few months, we have also seen a lot of attackers, both financial motivated and nation state attackers. They use COVID related themes to create some urgency, so people respond to phishing attacks and scams. And they often impersonating the health organizations, charities, or some NGOs to target the user to lure them into downloading some malicious malicious malware. And we have also seen nation state use this to target governments and also increase number of health organizations, public health agency, and the individuals they are working in the health industry. So yeah, like I think it's definitely a change in the cyber's perspective. And I think we were definitely going to see more companies being flexible on the work from home policy. And I believe this is good because people are diverse. It's always good for people to have more options to choose their working environment. But of course, at the same time, we will face a lot of challenge in terms of security because the hackers often see crisis as a great opportunity because of many reasons, because people are more emotional, they are worried for health and safety. And also, like you mentioned, that corporates that probably did not set up the remote work environments are now forced and rushed into it, and without carefully assessing the security risk and evaluating how the new solutions fits into the current infrastructure. Many of them also don't have an instant management process for these environments. So I believe this shows a surge of security risk. And also the equipment is also a risk that during remote work, there might be increased personal use of company device, that bad user personal behavior might lead to the company's breach. Also, location is actually another challenge because it's hard to control where people work remotely, and it's often that employee is surrounded by family, friends, or children, or even just stranger in the cafe. So without a strict company policy, it's often an overlooked risk of information leakage.
Thanks, Ashley. And Ty, I suppose as someone who, you run your own company and, you've got, employees and staff and other things to sort of consider, how has this sort of impacted yourself over these last 6 months?
Yeah, look, I mean, when, other than the COVID beard that I had to grow, when COVID kicked off, we all saw the escalation of that global economic financial crisis. And obviously, a lot of people were sort of worried for their jobs and their businesses. So, straight away when that kicked off or really, started becoming more and more serious, I personally pulled my team into a meeting and told them two things. One was that we had actually planned for this type of event through our business continuity plan. So business was viable and would be, for a long time. So they didn't have to worry from that perspective. But also, because people were worried about their jobs, I specifically said to them, actually, you don't have to be worried about your jobs in security right now. It's actually the opposite, that, you need to be worried about how busy you're going to get and the number of hours you're going to be working because, and I explained that in these economic downturns, they tend to lead to, individuals struggling financially. That then leads to, and that's globally, which then leads to an increase in crime. These days, the highest profit, least risk crime is cybercrime, and therefore we're going to see a massive spike in cybercrime. And, I said to him, give it a few months and you'll start seeing a lot of organizations suffering security breaches. So that pretty much ticked off within a couple of months of COVID really kicking in. And so from our perspective, it's been really sad to see some of our clients who have suffered financially, but also, from losing revenue, but also some of the clients who have been hit with some of these really malicious cyber attacks that have really escalated over the last 6 months.
Yeah, and I think that's a really good topic. We'll certainly get back to security breaches in a minute. But Ryan, I'll just jump over to you, but just change the topic a little bit, if that's okay. Still sort of on this remote sort of difference in working, if you want to call it. I've noticed a lot that a lot of companies that were doing a lot of business and a lot of processing on-prem are rushing a lot of things to trying to get things into the cloud as quickly as possible, and even utilizing some of those, multi-tenancy SaaS providers that are out there. Lots of pros and cons with both of these, and lots of challenges, from a business perspective to get things up and running quickly. But obviously lots of security issues that we need to account for. Have you sort of been across any of this, and sort of what are your thoughts on the transitioning from on-prem to whether it's a cloud workload or a SaaS solution?
Yeah. So I think you mentioned the key word there. A lot of companies are rushing, right? So it means that not a lot of things were in place. Maybe projects are not well thought of. The capability and the skill set within the organization is not yet present, for example, to be able to handle new services, new technologies that are being put online. So there's a lot of things that can go wrong in this type of situation. And given that there is a rush to deploy this immediately, there's a lot of configuration issues that can happen, or some security holes that they might not have patched, or vulnerabilities that that have not yet been patched, or they have inadvertently introduced just because they needed to connect quickly this service with this service, and maybe it was just the communication was in plain text, the API key is reused, or the password is reused. So things like this would be more prominent, I would think, in this kind of environment where everyone is scrambling. So and it's really hard. So for example, for me, I don't want to be a CISO right now, because there are a lot of things that I would need to audit, that I would need to have visibility on, that I would need to support, and that ultimately I would need to secure. So yes, there's a lot of things going on. And for me, it's a very high stress environment currently. And I think this is also why we are here, right? Why we are attending Black Hat, why security events like this still continuing, because we still need to be on top of these things. So networking, updating knowledge, knowing about what security solutions are available, knowing about what vulnerabilities are there, and what vulnerabilities are actually being weaponized and used by attackers. So this really plays a key part in helping us strategize and prioritize what we need to do and what we need to look out for in this very, very challenging period.
Thanks, Ryan. Yeah, and it is really, really tricky. There's lots of SaaS solutions that are going to help a lot of business. A lot of our businesses be able to kick up the digital experience pretty quickly. But a lot of the controls that we're relying on are things that are in contracts, or whether it's an ISO or a SOC type report, and it's very subjective. There's only there's a scope that you have to deal with. So, it can be quite challenging. I have noticed we are getting some questions through, which is great. Before I actually jump to the question, Ty, I just want to go back to what you were talking about before, with respect to security breaches. I mean, the world definitely has changed in the last 6 months. I mean, we're virtual. 6 months ago, we should have been in Singapore. Are we seeing like a turn of what security breaches are developing or look like in the last year, this year?
Yeah, look, it's certainly changed, in the last 6 months especially, and I actually haven't seen this cyber circumstance or situation occur or be as aggressive and active over the last 20 years. We're in a very unique time right now where, without trying to scare the CISOs, as you say, I wouldn't want to be in their position right now either, but they're going to have a very challenging time moving forward. So, over the last 6 months, we've been absolutely inundated with security breaches within Australia, and these aren't small security breaches either. These are multinational organisations, critical infrastructure providers, major organisations who are suffering very targeted, very aggressive attacks from international players all around the world. And so when we actually got to Black Hat USA, where we were running our training courses, I actually wanted to see if this was being seen just in our region or if this was globally, and basically asked all of our students across each of our training courses, and basically they were saying the same thing, which was interesting. And basically these aren't just the typical sort of drive-by attacks where, a web server gets breached and, the attacker puts some cryptocurrency mining software on there or some, distributed denial of service tools, and they don't even know the company that they've hacked, and they start attacking, someone else, right? And that's not what we've been seeing. Each one of them that we've been looking at, I still think that a bunch of them are still quite opportunistic attacks, but they were certainly targeted and focused on not just compromising the compute power, for example, of an organization, but actually infiltrating the organization, moving laterally, escalating their privileges, taking over the organization, and then carrying out their attack, whether that was data theft, or we've seen a bunch of quite large ransomware attacks where they've encrypted every single server across for these organizations globally, not even just within a particular region, and just shutting the entire organization down, then holding them to ransom for millions. Luckily, some of these places had some pretty good backup strategies in place, one with a very impressive disaster recovery situation in place. And we were able to help them recover that really, really quickly. But yeah, the actual attacks that we're seeing, I think the biggest shift that I've seen is just the aggressiveness and shifting to infiltrating organizations rather than just grabbing access to their compute power. And that's really the key thing, and also having those persistent attacks. So, we were in one particular situation, jumped in there very quickly. We kicked the attacker out. The actual organization responded a bit too slowly and actually got breached again. And we then kicked out the attackers and actually closed off that hole. And then they started coming through with other avenues of attacks, like phishing attacks, because the infrastructure or the application layer vulnerabilities were actually closed off. So the fact that they were coming back again and again was just really interesting to see, because often historically when we kick them out, they tend to then assume that there's a higher risk of getting caught, for example, and they go and move on to someone else. Whereas these days they just seem to be coming back again and again.
And Ashley, are you seeing a difference in the types of security breaches this past 12 months?
Yeah,
Ashley?
I don't really see breaches from my side, but as I mentioned, there are definitely, well, actually, I won't say there are new type of security attacks because they are probably the same old groups of attackers that we were seeing. But it's just that they are adapting more COVID and using people's fear about it to doing more social engineering attack and try to conduct more fraud or scam or phishing attack, like targeted attack.
I might change the subject a little bit because I know it was something that we were talking about in the green room before, just the subject of misinformation. And I know, Ashley, this is something that you're quite passionate about too. I mean, how do we think as I guess as a community, do you think we can fight this a little bit better?
Yeah, I think this is a very good question. I think that the most important part of our rules as a security community is to increase the public awareness of disinformation and provide a platform for the research. After the elections in 2016, there are more focus and research on the field in the US, but in my opinion, it doesn't get enough attention in Asia. I also hope that we can provide a platform and opportunity to encourage more research in this area and have more research to show people how we identify the disinformation operations. Because despite that this is now a hot issue and general public still like have very little understanding on how the social media or platform track these operations and mitigates. And this kind of asymmetric informations will cause more conspiracy and becomes a barriers for remediations. And this is why I'm really happy to see that we have talk submitted for the research on fake news analysis this year. I attended the talk. It was a really great talk. And in the past, we rarely or never saw briefing in Black Hat Asia to talk about these informations. And I think this talk would definitely help more people to understand from the analyst perspective how we identify the operations. And hopefully we will going to see more research toward these directions. And eventually there will be some frameworks of the analysis approach that people can follow.
Thanks, Ashley. Brian, I don't know, do you have any thoughts on this subject? Otherwise, I might jump over to a question. What do you think about this subject?
Yeah, about this information. Yeah. So I think what I think about it is that you also kind of look at it in a vacuum, like it's just this information happening. It's also driven by certain conditions that we are in right now. So for example, right now we are in a COVID situation wherein everyone is mostly online. So the effect of this disinformation is actually amplified because people are checking for news or using social media accounts to communicate with family members that they are not able to get physically or meet face to face, right? And also it's an election year in the US this year, and I think that also plays into all this politics and disinformation campaigns that are going on. So I think, yeah, this year is a very difficult year, especially with the disinformation and the environment that cultivates or makes that possible.
Thanks, Ryan. So there's a couple of questions that have popped up. I'll go through the first one, and this goes back to our discussion about working from home and just securing things now that we're, none of us are in the office anymore. So question one we've got is, how can a company take care of its digital assets when it's allowing its employees to work from home? So in particular, most organizations should be using a secure VPN. Should that be enough? I mean, I've got a bit of a viewpoint on VPNs, and I think it depends if you're an on-prem or a cloud-based company. I mean, things can definitely be secured using a VPN, or you've got a multi-factor approach. If you're going to go straight to cloud without a VPN, you obviously need those second factors. But I mean, definitely love to hear someone else's opinion on this. I mean, Ty, do you, again, I'm going back to you because you've got your own business, but securing digital assets is what are your thoughts on this?
Yeah, look, I think this has really escalated the whole zero trust model, where now that everyone's sort of distributed all over the place, and this has been quite a common challenge in industries like aviation, where a large portion of their staff is actually constantly, in other countries or flying around or in hotels and those sort of things. And we've seen really effective distributed security models using that zero trust approach, where you're not trusting the end device, basically sending everything through a VPN that enforces policies and using identity-based access to be able to gain access to only those systems that they require access to. And ultimately, by doing that approach, you can actually sort of isolate those systems from threats that are at home, because when you're on a home network, they no longer, typically you're connecting over things like Wi-Fi, but you've got your corporate network that might have, for the mature ones anyway, have Wi-Fi with digital certificates and hooked into their AD with password policies and those sort of things, which just don't exist on most home networks. So you're placing individuals in a less secure environment that has less visibility by the organization, less control by the organization. And therefore you need to enforce that sort of virtual boundary around the systems that allow you to connect into your organization, whilst not hindering, obviously, the business functionality. And I think that zero trust model, by enforcing the security on the device that's connecting, as well as the identity that's connecting, is a really good model for organizations to follow in this sort of climate.
Yeah, and I still think there's still a lot of resistance as well with, especially when you're moving to a cloud where there may not necessarily be a VPN that could be enforced, where, the business requirements still don't want that multi-factor. They just want to be able to log on. And if you're creating local credentials, well, then that's just going to open up to credential misuse. Mm-hmm. And, you're going to have your security breaches all over the place. Sorry. So it's definitely an interesting discussion. What about you, Ryan? I mean, what are your thoughts on, being able to secure those digital assets? I mean, do we need to use VPN or is there another way?
Yeah. For me, I would take a pragmatic approach about it. So I would review where the company data is, and if it's mostly, if they've already been adopting the cloud, then maybe they can accelerate their migration to, Office 365 or Google Docs or whatever cloud service that they're using. Or if their files, if their databases are still in corporate lands, then maybe VPN is the way to go. I'm recommending this because I think it's difficult to transition to one over the other at this point in time, especially that hardware and deployment is going to be difficult because people are not in the office. You need to also consider IT support, for example. If something goes wrong and you change something goes wrong, how do you resolve the issue? And there is man-hour costs related to that, right? So what my recommendation actually is to strengthen what you already have, because deploying something new would be very difficult in this time. And regarding VPNs, I wanted to point out that big IP F5 networks VPN, they had a vulnerability July, yes, July. That was there was a weaponization of that vulnerability a few days later, and actually in our telemetry we see that there's a lot of active attempts in exploitation for this vulnerability. So maybe this is also something that you guys need to put into the equation, that if you have not considered um, including VPN clients or VPN servers into your what you into your checklist in vulnerability update or in scanning, it is a very good time to do so, because this environment and the recent vulnerabilities that we've seen, and also the attack patterns, point to attackers actually having interest in this kind of things.
Thanks, Ryan. So just going through these questions again, Ty, there's one to you, but I think probably both, I might target both you and Ashley at the same time. The question says, there's only one nation that this particular individual knows of with a reputation of repeated attacks. Does Ty's observation mean this is wider now and even extended to criminal attacks?
Yeah, look, I certainly wouldn't put it down to one nation at all. I think that we've seen this across many nations, and they've come out and actively said this in the past from multiple countries. So it's definitely not one nation. I think one of them cops the blame a lot, whether it's them or not. It's extremely hard to do proper attribution of where the attacks are coming from. It is very easy to fake where the attacks are coming from, and you see that with a lot of the attacks that have been coming through. I mean, one of the national cyber attacks against Australia that we saw over the last few months, that the Prime Minister announced, we were actually investigating that a couple of weeks beforehand for a client that suffered a breach. And I mean, that was assumed by everyone to coming from a specific nation state, and there were definitely indicators pointing to countries like China. But when you delve into a lot of the details, there were also a lot of indicators pointing to Russia. There were attacks coming from the US. There were attacks coming through Tor. And we've seen others from a whole bunch of other countries that weren't related to China, for example, who constantly comes up. I'm not saying that they're not doing it. What I'm saying is that it is extremely hard to attribute that to anyone when you see indicators coming from almost every country on the planet. And from what I've seen over the last 3 to 6 months, is that these are not necessarily nation-based attacks. They've more been focused around cybercrime and financial gains. Even I think one of the interesting things that, you have to take with a bit of grain of salt in the media from governments talking about all these things, which comes back to some of the disinformation or misinformation that gets put out there, is one, the hype around some of these attacks and how sophisticated they are. I definitely don't think that a lot of these are sophisticated in any way whatsoever. What I've been describing to people is that they're organized and therefore able to break into organizations. They can then escalate themselves very quickly. But really the techniques and the attacks, I mean, our guys have sort of laughed at some of the approaches that they've taken and just questioned why you would go down that path, when it would be much easier to do this sort of attack. But I think that comes down to the methodology that they've got in place, because they're organized attackers rather than sophisticated, nation state attackers. But yeah, definitely more financially motivated. And when you look back at the UN, I think came out in 2018 and said it was up to $2 trillion of cybercrime revenue that gets laundered every year. That's a huge financial goal to go after, even just to get a chunk of that. And I think in the economic times that we're in, where a lot of places are struggling, that's going to be the main thing that people are going to be going after.
Thanks, Ty. Just taking note of the counter. I think we're all out of time. But look, I want to thank all of you again and for making the time to discuss today's events and some of the topics that have impacted all of us, I think, these last 6 months. Definitely come back tomorrow. This keynote's going to be a good one. And hopefully, you know, got any questions, ping us online and we'll see you tomorrow and hopefully next year in Black Hat Asia in Singapore. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you. Enjoy.
Bye.